Hi, this is Lives Touched by Pets, a show for those who love and are loved by pets. I'm your host, Lisa Desatnik, certified trainer with Much PETential in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm really glad that you're here. Welcome. If you began following my podcast last year, first of all, I really want to thank you. It means the world to me because I love doing these. And I'm thrilled to be kicking off 2025, doing it with my own teacher, Dr. Moira Hechenleitner. You may remember her from last year. Moira is a veterinarian and separation anxiety specialist who offers consultations to both pet owners and trainers like myself. She's an international speaker. And guess what? She's organizing a virtual separation anxiety conference, and I can't wait to go to it. If you have plans on bringing home a new puppy or rescue dog, this episode is for you. We are talking about acclimating your new friend to alone time. What in the world do we mean by that? Well, we're going to answer that. And when should you start? What considerations should you take into account? And our tips for crate training. That and so much more. Let's get this started. Hi, Moira. It's great to be back with you.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. And, this is my first episode back doing the podcast, so this is really special.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for choosing me.
Sure. Well, I adore you, and I think the world of what you do with separation anxiety. And this is a topic that I've really wanted to cover for a while because it comes up so often, both with people that are getting new puppies and people who have new rescues. But also it seems like something that comes out of the woodwork also when puppies start going through the phase of adolescence too. So we're talking about acclimating to alone time. And I think this is going to be a topic that's going to hit home for a lot of people. So I'm really glad that we can talk about it today. Instead of just waiting for it to be full-blown separation distress, let's talk about, well, how can we acclimate when they're starting to show signs or even before they're showing signs? When you're first bringing a puppy home, they're brand new. You're kind of plucking them out of the only place they ever knew. Now you're bringing them to your house, all new surroundings, all new people, all new everything. So is that do you think that's a good time to start with the acclimation process?
That's a great question. And I think I'm going to try to separate this question in different answers because I think it deserves to be talked about from different angles, if you will. The first one would be the being left alone per se. So rather than talking about crates, and I know we're going to dive deep into crates, it's very important subject and very popular subject out there, and there's a lot of confusion, misunderstandings, and we will definitely cover that. But first, we have to think about the alone time in itself. So when we get a puppy who just arrived to the home, or maybe it's not a puppy, maybe it's a grown dog or an adolescent who was rescued or just adopted, and they're just starting to live in this household. Although there aren't any guarantees that whatever we do is going to prevent separation anxiety, because we don't really know what causes separation anxiety, therefore we can't really prevent it. There are things that we could do to help them succeed or to set them up for success to the best of our ability. One of those is at first to allow them to be comfortable and to create predictability around their lives when they just arrive so they can feel safe. I like to think about both dogs and humans as beings who thrive, and any being really thrive from predictability in balance with flexibility. Predictability in someone's lives, routine, rituals, knowing what to expect allows us to heal, to anchor, to feel safe, to feel comfortable, not to be hypervigilant all the time, waiting for the next thing to happen. And on the other hand, flexibility allows us to grow, to push the edges of our discomfort, to be stressed, but at a level that we perhaps can handle and can allow us to become stronger and more resilient. So finding the right balance between those at each given time will allow us to have a puppy or a dog who is probably going to be set up for success. And what does this look like in practical ways? First, I would actually try my best to avoid leaving the dog alone for the first week, maybe the first 2 weeks. So rather than adopting a dog in the kind of just spontaneously out of the moment, like out of the moment excitement or something you just really want to do, to really think it through and plan in advance. So when the dog arrives to your house, you actually can take some time off and you're able to really provide that safety space and or safe space and that safety sense to the dog. Once you have had a dog for maybe 1 or 2 weeks and you haven't left them alone, and you can see that the dog is starting to feel much more comfortable in their own skin, they understand that this is their home, they aren't all the time super hyper vigilant looking for you, they're resting, they're relaxing, then you can start adding absences to the equation. And it is important. We don't want to avoid them, right? But we want to find the right time to start introducing them. And once you start doing your absences, and we're going to talk about this setup later, in general, what you want is to have short, gradual absences. So you can both assess that the dog is actually doing okay and that there are no red flags that you should be addressing in case the dog already has separation anxiety since before he came to you or she came to you. And you also want to help them adapt. So you're at this point starting to work on the flexibility part of things, right? So you're pushing the dog to the edges of their discomfort by doing little absences, maybe every other day, maybe once a day, and maybe you can start with 15 minutes, 20, 30. The importance of this is to make it variable. So even though you want to increase the duration over time, you don't want to go 5 minutes, 10, 15, 30, 40, 1 hour, because it's going to get harder and harder and harder. And that doesn't really work very well for anybody. You want to vary it and increase gradually. And you also want to monitor. You want to make sure you're serving at least for the first month, so you can see different parameters or assess different parameters. One of them being that the dog, if they react at all, you can see that over the course of the absence and in between the days, like over time, they react less and less intensely and less frequently, and they spend more and more time relaxed while you're away. And that would be a right thing to, like, basically a good flag saying, hey, yes, this is working in the right way.
So quick question. When we talk about absences, it's sounding like you're talking about actually leaving the home. What about absences like while you're in the home with a puppy? You know, we've got issues, you're working through house training and you're working on, chewing on appropriate things. And so there's the management piece. How does that play in? And is that what you're talking about, or is that separate, or is it the same?
One thing with separation anxiety that is something that is not very talked about, and there's not a lot of information, or at least the correct information out there. It's more and more, it's growing and it's improving at this point, but there's still some misinformation out there, is that when you leave a dog in another room, let's say, and you are trying to test out if they are okay with being alone, basically, but the dog can totally know that you are outside, or that you're outside the house, but maybe like on the other side of the door, or there's a baby gate and you're in one room and then they're in the other. There are other components that could be triggering the behaviors you're seeing. And one of those, the big one, is frustration. And the problem with that is that you are not going to know if the dog is reacting due to frustration or due to actual separation anxiety until you leave the property and they perceive that you're gone. And so a good way to start working with this is to actually leave the area. But you can drive or walk, depending on the setup of your household, until they can't perceive you. Maybe that's 2 houses down the road. just to a point where you can wait and observe. And it's a short absence. So at first, you're not going to be doing anything real. But over time, if you're seeing good results, you will start using those absences to maybe go to the pharmacy, get a coffee or something like that until they expand in duration. But it is important to actually work on leaving the property because it will allow us to understand what is actually going on. Some clients arrive to me thinking that their dog has separation anxiety because the only times they have seen them react is when they were, I don't know, like mowing the lawn outside or washing the car, and the dog was barking and reacting and vocalizing and escalating. And as soon as we did an assessment with them leaving the property, the dog would look and say, okay, I guess you're done. I guess you're gone. I guess I just have to take a nap. And they would just go and settle for the remaining of the absence. So it is important to actually do real absences. And you mentioned another thing, and I don't want to go ahead, but you mentioned about the management and the puppies, right? So when we have a puppy and we don't know if the dog is house trained or if they are going to chew on things that we don't want them to chew, that could be unsafe for them, the first biggest point is to make sure that when you start doing those absences, all of the dog's needs are met and that you're setting the dog up for success. And this, of course, doesn't only apply to puppies or dogs who just arrived, but any dog. You want the dog to be comfortable, to have had walks and food and potty time. So, and also to do this at a time where they are not expecting to do something with you, perhaps. If you leave them alone exactly at the time that they thought they were going to go for a walk with you, they might react, but due to that. So you really want instead of trying them and make them fail, you really actually want them to succeed. And so you prepare all of your environment for that purpose, and then you leave them for short periods of time. If they are puppies and they're not house trained, or you don't know if they're going to chew on something, my usual advice is to block certain areas of the house and make the house puppy proof. And the least intense way possible. What do I mean with that? I mean that I try not to block too much, but enough for the dog to be safe, but not too much for the dog to feel so restricted that if they have confinement issues, they start reacting due to that. And because you're starting short, the cool thing about this type of training is that because you're starting short and all the needs of the dog are met, you will set them up for success. And they will start learning that those 15 minutes that they were long on, it was really nap time. And since you're going to be extending this time gradually, they start learning, well, I guess when you are not here, now I relax and I wait for you to come back. And very soon you have a dog who, it was like a win-win. The dog learned to be left alone, and the dog also learned to be okay when alone without getting into trouble, without doing things that they didn't supposed to, because they were able to succeed in that regard. And in many cases, there's really no need of doing anything else in terms of house training, in terms of chewing on things, because this grows in a positive way over time.
Great. That's really helpful. You talked about predictability also. And for those that don't know, what do you mean by predictability? Are you meaning like we feed the food at the same time? Or are you meaning we come in the door and this is what the predictable pattern is going to be for the dogs?
Great question. And yes, those are great examples. We want to create some sort of routine, even for us during our weekdays, right? Most of us, we have a routine. We wake up at a certain time, maybe we take a shower, we have breakfast, we take the dog out, and there's a certain smoothness, there's a certain groove about the routine that allows us not to really be thinking about every piece of it. It sort of soothes our mind, our brain, and it allows us to relax. Nothing unexpected is happening. So that could look like exactly like we wake up at a certain time, you have breakfast, then we go for a walk, then we take a nap, or you take a nap while I'm working, then we go for a longer walk, and here's where we sleep. Basically, and it's okay to change it up a little bit. And I'm not really fond of never changing anything. What I'm saying is that in this particular context, when the dog is just arriving, that can be very helpful. Over time, you do want to become flexible. So if any changes happen in the dog's life, they're likely not going to be traumatizing enough to trigger something we don't want. We believe separation anxiety is triggered by traumatizing events and that there is a genetic predisposition. And both things together basically trigger the onset of separation anxiety. So if the dog doesn't really find anything traumatizing because they are so flexible with change, they are so adaptable, even if they have the genetic predisposition, it likely won't never be triggered because the dog never felt uncomfortable. So we do want to add those little things here and there. And maybe in the future, they eat whenever we're available and we give them food. Like there's no necessarily a super tight schedule, but that comes with time. And once the dog has become comfortable and has healed their past after coming to you.
Okay. The crate. So I know there are differing opinions. I tend to think, it's the one time that the puppies are going to need that much sleep in their life. And, just making it so comfortable and you're sitting right there with them, you're getting all their needs met and they're good and tired too, and they're really needing to rest, and just helping and soothing them and giving them comforting things in the crate, and just starting to condition them to teach them that crate is just really comfortable and it can be a really safe place too. What are your thoughts on that?
And I see you laughing as you ask me. I promise I'll behave. So and I'll explain how I do it if I need to, which I think is very similar to how you approach it. But I would like to make two big distinctions that I think are very important to keep in mind when you welcome a new dog into your house. The first one, and I'm going to give you, we're talking, right, Lisa, before we started this podcast about me becoming a yoga teacher last year. And I'll have a point, I promise. I became, after many years of practicing yoga, I decided to deepen my practice, and I went into a 200-hour yoga teacher training last year. And while I was doing that, I remember in one of the classes and one of my sessions with my teachers, one of them said, you do have to design your class, right? You have to have a goal in mind when you design your class, and it has to have different pieces, like warming up and getting deep into your poses and then cooling down and all of that. And so she said, yes, please do that. And make sure that you add everything you think about. However, once you get to your class, remember that information and then let it go. And be there, present, and do what it needs to be done. Why? Because you can plan the most beautiful class with the craziest transitions. Everything is super fancy. And then you get to give your class, you arrive to the place, and maybe you have a couple of beginner, students that don't understand anything of the things that you thought you were going to teach. Maybe you have a few people with different injuries that they can't really do what you were thinking. And maybe you start teaching and everybody looks so tired and you can tell that it's just too much for them. And you can't just keep going with your script because they're not going to enjoy the class and it's not going to be successful in any way, right? You have to change things up as you go, and you have to honor each situation. You have to, rather than following something because you learned it that way, you have to actually continue to assess and make decisions based on what you're seeing. Why am I telling you all this story? Is because the first thing I would recommend is to stay open. So yes, crates can be great and you can try it out with your dog. But if your dog doesn't respond well to the crate and you try different things and you see that the dog is actually having a very hard time and they can have confinement issues, which is different than separation anxiety. Basically, it's an aversion to the crate itself, or not even the crate, to being restricted, feeling restricted. And maybe when they're left free in the house, they're totally fine. Some dogs can have both. They can have crate issues or confinement issues, and also separation anxiety, meaning they react when alone, but if you put them in a confinement space, they react more intensely and more frequently. So if you start observing that in your dog, it's okay. You don't have to use confinement. There are ways around it, and you can be completely successful with your dog free in the house. It's not a bad thing. You didn't fail the class. It's totally fine. And I think that's the most important thing to remember. If you're going to remember one thing about this podcast, remember that, because I get so many clients who arrive to me so frustrated because they have tried to crate or confinement in so many ways, and they're heartbroken and they just don't want to keep working anymore. They think there's no solution. And it only takes to see how the dog does free in the house to solve the situation. So stay open. And that was one of the things I wanted to say. And the second thing I was going to say, I totally forgot because I got too excited with my explanation. But thinking about coming back, I remember. This second main point is that I believe, and this is my opinion, I believe that if you're going to be leaving your dog 8 hours alone, in the long term, you may not really want to leave them in a crate. I believe a crate is very small, and it shouldn't really be a long-term solution. I agree with you that it can help to create balance in the resting periods and activity periods and the house training for a puppy. And it also has many other goals, maybe traveling by car, maybe being at the hospital, like at the vet clinic, maybe traveling by air, of course, or doing sports with your dog. But I don't think about the crate necessarily as a place for the dog to be left alone forever. So I usually put all of my attention into working in a setup that allows us to quickly teach the dog to be left free, because that's the setup I want to replicate in the long run. And that's why I sort of manage the environment in the best way I can to allow the dog to be safe. And I really focus on the house training and in the chewing on things. I put all my might on that, because if we have that resolved in 2 weeks, then nothing else matters, because there's no danger anymore, right? And we can leave the dog alone without any issues.
Right. Yeah. And I totally, I'm right there. I didn't say that, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we're assessing, the individual that's in front of us. It's always a study of one and what's going on with that dog or puppy. And yeah, so those are excellent points. Sure.
If you want to work on the crate for the other reasons that we mentioned, right? And what you were pointing out, like what if we need to really help this puppy to take naps and to settle? How do we do it? You mentioned I don't think you mentioned it on air, but you mentioned it to me, your approach, and I really like it, because basically what I read from your description is that while you were working on the crate, you weren't leaving the dog in the crate. And I think that is the key point, because the same as with separation anxiety training, if a dog has separation anxiety, what do? We introduce gradual absences at a point that the dog can handle, right? Under threshold where the dog feels safe and comfortable, and we expand the duration from that point on. And we, at the same time, parallel to that, we suspend absences, real absences. We're not leaving the dog alone. We're not exposing them to that trigger while we're teaching them that trigger is safe, because it would be counterproductive, right? So what happens with the crate is that we tend to forget that. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest mistake and the reason for failure for so many types of crate training is that, yeah, sure, you do your training session, it's super fun. You teach the dog to go to the crate, you give them treats and all of that stuff. But then you actually have to leave, and you leave your dog in the crate for 8 hours. If the dog is over threshold at that duration in the crate when left alone, which adds to that bucket of stress, right? It's a trigger stacking situation. Maybe the dog is okay in the crate when you're sitting beside him, but if then you leave, adds up. So if you're exposing the dog to a very aversive situation at the same time as you're trying to teach that same dog that this is fun and okay, it's very unlikely that you're going to make progress. And I love your approach because you were mentioning that you actually don't use the crate until the dog has achieved a certain amount of time in the crate, comfortable with you out of sight. And that's exactly the same approach I would have.
Yeah, we can go on a whole tangent about the crate, but I just had a client the other day went through similar things. Her puppy was very anxious in the crate. She didn't think she could use the crate, and I talked to her about my approach, and within a weekend, her puppy was very comfortable and sleeping in the crate. So yeah, just making sure it's one time that you've got that your puppy needs that much sleep, and if you're exercising their mind and body, and then you're making it super, super comfortable, and you're just right there with your puppy. I kind of give some comforting food too while they're laying down, and do not close it. It's just a comfortable place. If they want to come out, they're welcome to come out, but make it so comfortable that they choose to go in there until they settle. But yeah, not even like closing the door or anything until they're very, very comfortable with it, and then having a webcam on it to make sure. But I remember the day that I was able to go to the grocery store, and it's such a big deal. I was looking at my phone the whole time while making sure he was okay. And now, my dog has some different anxiety issues, and the crate is very much his safe place, and he loves to be, spend time in that crate. So, yeah, but when people don't work through it, a couple other things. Now we're on this tangent. Another thing people talk about is, well, we've got to feed our dog in the crate, and we've got to do all these things in the crate. But if you're not making it a safe place, feeding the dog in the crate can also, have a negative effect on the
Totally.
crate.
That's a very, very, very good point. And I'm glad you made it because I get a lot of cases in which they have been trying to feed the dog in the crate. And one way I like to think about dogs is that they're not a dresser full of little compartments that you can kind of put different anxieties and different issues in different drawers, and nothing gets contaminated with each other. Instead, they actually like soup, like a pool. Everything gets mixed up, right? So if you're adding a certain amount of stress in one area of the dog's life, it's going to spill over other areas. And if you're forcing them to eat in a situation where they feel very unsafe and uncomfortable, and they basically, because that's where they eat the whole ration of the day, if they're not there, they don't eat, basically. And what's happening is that they learn to eat in distress, in a state of distress. That's not comfortable. Imagine if we had to always eat in a way that's very comfortable and uncomfortable, and we feel like we're running away from a serial killer while we're eating our dinner. It's probably going to cause issues, medical issues, anxiety issues. It's going to add up. So you don't really want to force the dog at that level. You want to either give them food in a place where they feel super comfortable so they can enjoy their food, they can relax, they can have that predictability we were talking about. That is safe. I got your back, basically. In a way, we're telling them, I got your back. If I am asking you to do something a little bit harder than you can, it's always going to be above the rest of the things that you can trust me on. So all of this life that we have together, you can trust me with. You're going to be safe. And we're going to add these little things here and there. They're a little bit harder, but we're going to work as a team, and it's never going to jeopardize the rest of your safety, like daily safety, basically. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And I love that you add like food, and that you leave, and that you make the crate to be a safe place, because they have the choice to be there or not. We're not shoveling them in and telling them you have to be there because you're supposed to be in a crate because you're a dog. No, you're actually telling them this is an amazing place to be. If you don't want to be there, that's okay too. And that will likely, as you were mentioning, help them to actually feel comfortable they're there and seeking it in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see this being really a helpful discussion for a lot of people because this is a big topic for everyone who brings a new puppy or rescue into the home. So, yeah. Oh, I really appreciate you being here and talking to this. Is there anything else that when it comes to acclimating to alone time?
I think that one other aspect of the crate, and I remember you mentioning it in your protocol as well, was when do we start to leave the area? So the area where the crate is, right? So as you were mentioning, first we want to make sure the dog is comfortable in the crate with the door open, then with the door closed with us around, and then maybe we go to the kitchen and come back, and it takes us 3 seconds, and they're still okay. And slowly we build duration of us not being able to see us. And in this particular case, different than what we talked before about assessing absences after the dog has adapted to live in our house. Here, definitely, we are not just going to drive away and leave, right? We're going to go to another room and come back, and we're going to build duration with the dog comfortable without having us in sight. And then eventually, when the dog is super proof and super comfortable in that context, if we are going to use it for a long time, then we can start introducing a long time in that setup, but only for a duration that we know the dog is fine with us in the crate if we were with them, basically, or if we were out of sight but in the house. So we build from there, and we don't expose them to higher durations or harder situations at other times, only during training until we build that. And the other thing that I remember we were talking about, I think before the podcast, is about where to set it up, or if it's not a crate, even if it's just a room of the house, or there's some sort of baby gate and we are blocking a certain area for the dog or an X-pen. And how do we set it up so it's set up for success? So first, I see that a lot, and this is my opinion, but I see a lot that crates are located in places that are very, very far away from where I would be. And I understand the idea behind it, that is to provide the dog with some sort of relaxed place, not noisy, where there's not a lot of things around so they can rest. However, it can actually be very, very stressful because they're not used to be there. It's like putting them in the dungeon. It's not comfortable. It doesn't feel cozy. It's just a weird punishment that they're just going to be here, like in a weird, laundry space. So what I would suggest is for the crate to be in a place where they can see around. Even dogs without separation anxiety, when you leave them alone, they like to anchor themselves in places where they have visual access to everything. So they know when you're coming back, they know when the car is going to come back, they know how things are like developing because they can see them from that spot. So I would go and do ahead with the same with the crate. I would have it in a place where they usually hang out with us, where they feel comfortable hanging out, and where they ideally have visual access to the door we leave from and all of the other areas that are important to them. If it's not a crate, then if you are confining your dog to a certain area of the house, I would advise for that area to be the one that has contact with the door you're leaving from. They tend to have a easier time to deal with absences when they can see where you go through, basically, or where you departure from, rather than having, let's say, being in a bedroom and then not being able to see where you're going, or having a baby gate blocking the hallway where you go out from. That tends to be very restrictive, and with dogs with confinement issues tend to have a very hard time dealing with that restriction. So you want to allow them to kind of go and check where you left from, and that tends to help a little bit.
Does any of that change if you've got a busy home with lots of little kids running around? I guess probably you want a gate around the perimeter of the crate so kids can't get right up to it. But even just being in among where all the activity is, what are your thoughts on that?
That's definitely a harder situation. It's a good point. And as we were discussing at the beginning, every dog is an individual, right? And every household is a unique experience. So it is important to assess each situation as its own and find what works. It's hard to make a decision without knowing a specific example, but definitely we want to keep certain points in mind. We want to allow the dog to feel safe, right? Without feeling that they're always going to be grabbed and played over. And so if they need that space, we kind of what we were saying, we have a certain limitation that allows them to not being in touch with the kids. If the kids have toys and stuff, maybe baby gating the doorways of the kids' rooms, so the dog doesn't get in trouble and there's no issues there. Like things like that would be important to consider. And the biggest part would be you can always trial and error. Observing is your best friend. So find a setup, but don't get attached to it. Find a setup, try it out, observe it a couple of times, not only one, maybe 2, 3 times, so you can see a trend. How is this working? Is it getting better every time I do this? Or is it getting worse? And if it works for you, great. If you see that your dog is having issues settling, is hypervigilant, and things seem to be getting more and more tense, it means that, well, it's not working and you should try a little tweak here and there to see how that works out. Same with multiple dogs in the house that I remember you mentioning. That's also going to change things. Maybe I have a dog who I wouldn't choose to leave confined, but then I have other dogs in the house. I don't know. I'm not feeling comfortable with leaving them together because they have resource guarding or their behaviors, or I don't really know much. So you will have to be flexible, and sometimes it's not going to be the best choice you would have made, but you will have to settle for the second best, just so you can find a balance between safety and also comfort.
Yeah. Okay.
One example, if I can add, I think it's a good example to add. I don't have the final answer because we're working through it right now, but I have a current client who they are fostering this dog, and she is the sweetest dog, and she was displaying behaviors, separation-related behaviors when left at home alone. And so we assessed. And the first assessment, and there are a lot of things going on. You know, she hasn't been there for too long, so there is also an adaptation, component that is adding up to the challenge. But we assessed, and the first assessment was done with the other dog, was their dog, leaving with them at the time of the assessment. So they would clip the leash and bring the other dog with them and leave in the car and drive away. And she reacted quite a bit, but the reactions seemed to be cyclical to me, and I wanted to see a little bit more. So the homework was to do absences, couple, just to observe if it was working for her or not. But with the other dog in the bedroom instead, proven that the other dog was okay in the bedroom. And it changed the whole picture. She whined a couple of times and then she went and settled, which tells me, well, seeing the other dog leaving is probably pretty frustrating for her because everybody's leaving me and I'm just the only one staying here. But when that is not part of the equation, I can handle this much more. Some dogs may react and whine when the other dog is confined, and you will have to find a way to work through that. But again, same message, staying open and finding what is the right combination for each dog is what's going to ultimately set you up for success.
That brings up a whole nother point. I can just try and be brief with this, but there are lots of dogs or puppies that come into homes that are so hyper attached to the other dog that they actually have anxiety when the other dog leaves, not so much the people, but if the other dog is not present, they have a lot of anxiety.
What I would do with that is a couple of things. So, and I was editing a video of that a couple of days ago, so it's fresh in my mind. The first thing would be to actually assess that the dog is okay when fully alone, but with the other dog on board. Because if the dog is okay with the other dog, and it's totally okay with being without any humans in the house. Basically, it means that this isn't likely separation anxiety in the sense that we define separation anxiety being the not being able to be okay without humans. And if that's the case, I would build a foundation with the dog being left with the other dog without humans. Because as that foundation gets stronger and stronger and stronger, the dog is going to become more comfortable being alone, right? And then slowly, once I have that cushion of support and the dog is stronger and more resilient, I can start again adding that extra challenge, pushing the edges of discomfort by now removing the other dog from the equation. Maybe not leaving with the other dog, but perhaps the other dog is already away, and then I leave this dog alone. And slowly I build a new set of criteria, right? A new criteria here, but with the help of having this foundation or cushion to allow me to succeed in the new extra difficulty that I'm adding.
Okay. Yeah. See that happen a lot. Well, this has just been such a great conversation. We went in a number of different directions, but I think they're all really, really important for people. So I'm really glad that we could do this and give people information they can learn by. And yeah, better animal welfare, better relationships, happier in the home. Yeah, all for it.
Definitely. I think that we definitely went in a lot of different directions, which are all important to change the mindset that dogs have to do what we think they have to do, but rather learning about our dog's needs and observing them to understand what is that they need at each given time and providing that with empathy. Yes, we want to see the best out of them. We want to help them succeed. We want to get to certain goals. But understanding that we're a team rather than I am the one who tells you what to do and you have to do it because this is the way it's supposed to go, it's going to be much more successful and much more healing and fun in the long run, right? If you have a dog. And so I think that changing that mindset will allow everything else to fall into place.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with me. It's always great to see you again. And yeah, we'll wrap it up with this. So thank you. For people to find you, I'm going to have a link in my show notes. But real quickly, what is your website?
My website is separationanxietydog.com, and they can find everything there. So if they need it, I'll be happy to help. And thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. Always fun to talk with you and to, save the world together.
One dog at a time. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to my podcast. Come back often and tell your friends. If I can be of any help to you and your pet, please reach out to me via my website, www.somuchpetential.com. And for a lot more information, fun, and videos, please follow me, So Much PETential, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. See you soon.